Hello, I'm Locke Meredith with Legal Lines. I'd like to invite you to join me on the next show. We have State Senator Jay Dardenne. Senator Dardenne is going to talk to us about the comment made by FEMA Director Michael Brown that our state government is dysfunctional, as is the local governments. He's also going to talk to us about the trauma the Baton Rouge area has sustained to its infrastructure because we've had 150 to 200,000 folks come here because of the hurricanes. So join us on the next Legal Lines with State Senator Jay Dardenne. Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I'm proud to have on the show Jay Dardenne. He is a Louisiana State Senator. Jay, these are interesting times we find ourselves in.
They're very interesting, Locke. They're tough times.
We've had two major hurricanes hit the state, caused catastrophic damage, and we've got the director of FEMA saying that our state and local governments are dysfunctional. You're a Louisiana State Senator. Let's talk about it.
Yep.
What's your thought on the subject?
Well, dysfunctional is a harsh word, of course, but it probably is not inaccurate when you look at the overall response of what happened at virtually every level in an unprecedented tragedy for the state. It's hard to imagine preparing for what Louisiana had to endure, no matter how well your emergency management plans are. But
is that a pass card? I mean, do you say it was just so bad nobody could have planned for it, so cut us some slack?
No, I don't think anybody can say that. But I think it is accurate to say that it's difficult to plan for as much as what we had to deal with in the scenario that we had, where the thought was we were going to be able to deal with what was going on from a hurricane standpoint, but not have to deal with the floodwaters that came into New Orleans after everyone thought the hurricane was over.
Which is interesting, because after the hurricane, it really seemed like nobody was that concerned. It didn't seem catastrophic, and when the water started flowing, that's when it kind of blew up in everybody's face.
It was absolutely catastrophic for Plaquemines and St. Bernard and parts of St. Tammany as a result of the wind and the water surge, and that was going to be truly a catastrophe of biblical proportions, if you will, for Louisiana. Then when the levee breached in New Orleans and we created, and it was created that scenario where the water was rising and people were trapped in New Orleans, you had a whole different level of concern that was not so much the kind of the hurricane pickup afterwards. And that's what really, in my mind, created the problems that you want to say, why could this have not been handled better? It's inexplicable to me that we were unable to get water to people standing on an interstate trying to evacuate, that we were unable to get buses or some means of transportation down there in a better fashion to be able to remove people from that particular setting.
There's really no reasonable explanation for it other than, I thought he was going to do it, I thought she was going to do it, I thought they were going to do it. I mean, is that what everybody's saying?
Well, yeah, and there are probably some fair logistical questions about numbers of buses available, how quickly they could have been staged, where they were staged, and questions that we just don't know the answer to at this point. And in the wake of this are going to be obviously many investigations and many questions, but that was a source of frustration in my mind as to why we could not have had a more prompt response, an appropriate response to at least make certain people were not sitting out there on an interstate easily accessible from the west for hours on end with no water or no nothing.
Or even if you didn't move them from where they were to get subsistence to them.
Right.
Because frankly, in my mind, I'm going, where would you take all these people? I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, or at least tens of thousands of people, and, you know, the River Center's housing, what, 5,000, or did? I mean, where else were they going to take them? To the Cajun Dome? And
that's the question. I mean, where are you going to go with people? But at least you're going to get them out of the immediate harm's way, or get them some water, some subsistence, something, while you can determine where people are going to go. In many respects, there were heroic efforts taking place to save people, and there were thousands of people who were heroically saved and cared for at a time of crisis. There were many who weren't, and they're going to be the focus of an awful lot of discussion in the wake of this.
And it's interesting because it was an appropriate priority to say, look, we're going to rescue people who are going to die if we don't go get them. I guess I'm just trying to understand why you couldn't do that, which they did, it seems, exceptionally well, and at the same time take care of the folks who are housed over in the various centers.
Well, one of the frustrations I had during the wake of everything was trying to understand why there could not be better multitasking, if you will, by the various agencies who were involved. It was almost like my experience with FEMA coming in and the assistance that they were trying to give to the search and rescue effort, which was really more of a local project.
Operation, huh?
We couldn't get, in my view, FEMA to move quickly enough to be able to start determining what they were going to do in the wake of the removal of these people and in the startup of their real task, which is to manage the emergency and figure out where people are going to go, how we're going to get them there, how quickly we can build shelters and what have you.
So that's what they do, because I heard Michael Brown in his testimony to the Senate, after saying we're dysfunctional, say he does and then he doesn't coordinate. What does FEMA do?
Well, we're going to find out what FEMA does. And
we know what they don't do.
There's an awful lot of confusion about what they do. And as we're speaking right now, I haven't had the benefit of having heard 1 second of anybody's testimony on what they said. So I don't know what people said. I have to qualify what I'm saying with that. But FEMA's role is supposed to, by definition, is to manage an emergency. That's what their title is. And I saw precious little management of the emergency as it was underway from what limited role I played in what was going on. But what I did see in some of the efforts I was engaged in trying to develop a plan or assist in developing a plan for this community, what Baton Rouge was going to have to do in the wake of its swelled population and its relief efforts and everything else, was we couldn't get FEMA to move hardly at all. We couldn't get any action in terms of people who wanted to help, getting coordination, getting assistance and direction. And that's what I was under the impression FEMA would come in here and do, is provide the leadership and the direction for the emergency management effort. It was extremely slow in coming.
Why?
I can't tell you that. I can't tell you why they were not in a position to move quicker, to make decisions more effectively, or to follow up on information that they were given with people who were waiting to be directed on what they could do to start developing shelters, start clearing land, start thinking about what the future would look like, both in the short term and long term, in the wake of what Baton Rouge was facing. And that's what I was dealing. That's what I was dealing with. That's really all I can speak to.
Well, was it a top down, or was it at every level that you encountered at FEMA that they didn't have the authority, or concerned that they didn't have the authority to do what was being requested?
Well, yes and yes. It was a bureaucratic
the whole thing.
A bureaucratic nightmare at virtually every level, particularly, I would say, at the FEMA level, in terms of what appeared to me to be the traditional bureaucracy of waiting to get reports from task forces and people who were engaged in certain decision making, and not having people on the ground who were empowered to make decisions, or who could come forward and say, this is the way we're going to get it done. That was extremely disappointing to me from a Baton Rouge perspective.
And I know you've heard the reports that there was problems between the president and Blanco, and that's the reason nothing took place, or problems between the governor and the mayor of New Orleans, and that's the reason things didn't happen the way they should have. But you don't really lend any credibility to that, do you?
No, I don't lend any credibility to the notion that the three individuals, George Bush, the president, Kathleen Blanco, the governor, Ray Nagin, the mayor, let any kind of personal feelings about each other inject itself into this at all. I would give no credence to that.
But they'd be putting the health and safety of thousands and thousands of people in jeopardy.
And I would not say that would be the case with any of those three individuals. There were certainly political differences among all three of them, but I don't think there were personal feelings that would engender any results that would be detrimental to the overall effort. Were there communication issues? Obviously there were, just based upon what we've seen to date.
All right, let's continue this topic on the next segment. It's Locke Meredith, Legal Lines, and Senator Jay Dardenne. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, pleased to have on the show Senator Jay Dardenne, and we're talking about Katrina and Rita and the havoc they've wreaked on our state. Jay, we talked about FEMA and how basically, based on your observations and your involvement, you couldn't get anybody to do anything. They just seemed inept or felt like they weren't authorized to do anything. Let's talk about the state. What were your observations about the involvement you had with the state?
Well, I didn't have that much involvement with the state. I mean, from the standpoint that I'm not really part of the in crowd and the leadership. I didn't really have a role in any manner or form to speak of. I was at the OEP quite a bit, and obviously the
OEP
state,
is
the Office of Emergency Preparedness. So we're the kind of the hub of where a lot of the decision making, a lot of the meetings that you were seeing on TV taking place, and the state obviously, from a pure D infrastructure standpoint, was not equipped to deal with this kind of a crisis.
And when you say infrastructure standpoint, what do you mean?
Just in terms of the ability to be able to provide personnel, equipment, and everything else to deal with the levee breach, the whole evacuation of New Orleans, given the fact that there was a concentration of people in large areas that were underwater. Just overall, there was not, and I don't know that anybody could have put in place the kind of infrastructure on the ground that would have been ready to have moved immediately.
And so that's not the governor's fault, is it?
Well,
or
no.
is it?
I mean, I don't know that it's any one individual's fault, and I'm not going to put the fault on anybody. I mean, we're a nation of blame game players right now
sure
as a society,
right,
and certainly in the wake of something like this, there's a general sense, well, somebody must be at fault. Somebody must have really done something wrong, and we can point the blame at them and hold them responsible. Everybody ought to be held responsible. There was failure at every level, and it didn't start when the hurricane hit. It started years and years ago with our priorities, with our spending practices, with our failure to invest in the kind of things that would have protected us from a lot of this. Now, the levee being one of them, clearly.
Good God, I can't comprehend not having a backup levee. Either constructing one that's high enough and strong enough, or putting multiple protective levees. I don't understand that.
Well, and there's going to be lots of discussion, obviously, about what could have been done. The Corps of Engineers is in charge of the levee, and there's going to be a lot of discussion about what role they should have played. We have these levee boards all over the place in Louisiana, which is a whole other issue of what levee boards have done with money that's been appropriated to them, and frankly, why we need all these dozens of levee boards all over the place.
So basically, we have levee boards that are supposed to, I guess, manage and control the various levees in the state, and they ultimately have the say?
Well, I don't know. Again, the Corps of Engineers has the ultimate responsibility for levees and for that whole system that was created and put in place in the wake of the flood of 27. So many of these levees were built in the wake of that flood, and there's going to be an awful lot of discussion about the relative role of the Corps of Engineers, the state of Louisiana overall, and the particular levee boards and what they did with monies that may have been appropriated to them.
Are you recommending the elimination of those levee boards?
Oh, I think it would be a good idea to do away with a lot of the bureaucracy that exists, including the multiple layers of levee boards that we have. But in the times I've been in the legislature dealing with budgets, dealing with capital outlay bill, there have not ever been huge appropriations for levies coming from state dollars. There's an awful lot of money being spent on all kind of other pet projects, but you can say, why hasn't the legislature appropriated more money for that particular purpose to go along with the federal appropriations that would have been there for the levies through the federal appropriation? There have been an awful lot of other things that have come down for the state that haven't been for levee protection. So that's where I'm saying you can go back. You can't just start right now saying, why did this happen? It happened for an awful lot of reasons, some of which absolutely could have been prevented. Not only was it foreseeable, it was predicted. When you look at the work that was done within the past year on the mythical Hurricane Pam, and some of that data.
Because I remember the director of FEMA saying, hey, I'm proud of this. I anticipated this. We did this whole mock.
Well, some of that information that's become available now about what was anticipated through the mock Hurricane Pam is just chilling, because some people just chose, apparently, if you listen to some of what I saw in some reports, to just dismiss it. Well, it's not going to happen. And I think many, many people felt like that was the worst-case scenario, and the worst-case scenario probably won't happen. And it did. I mean, it's exactly what happened to create this particular problem. I guess it's not the worst of the worst-case scenario, because the worst-case scenario would have been the direct hit on New Orleans breaching the Mississippi River levees as well as the levee from Lake Pontchartrain without an evacuation plan in place. And to the state's credit, in the wake of the storm last year, the contraflow plan was developed, and it did work. Thousands of people's lives were saved because the plan was developed, and because they listened, and because the call went out with enough time for people to leave.
And it was a staged evacuation also. It was regulated and orderly.
And it worked well. And if everyone would have or could have heeded the evacuation order and gotten out, the catastrophic loss of life in Orleans proper would not have been as profound as it's proven to be.
Let's talk about the effects on Baton Rouge. We have, 140, 150,000 more people here in Baton Rouge, and this is your hometown. What are we doing?
The effects are profound, and really that's really what I have been doing more than anything, I guess, in the wake of the particular wake of the storm is getting together with the mayor and with the local delegation to begin the process of how we deal with this, both in the emergency short term that's behind us now and in the wake of dealing with the new population growth, the infrastructure needs, the problems related to the housing of evacuees who will be here some short term and some for a longer term, and that's obviously providing a huge strain on traffic and on public services in this community.
I got to tell you though, Jay, I'm very proud of our city.
You
guys have done a great job, and the mayor, Kip Holden, has done a great job.
The city had, and I shouldn't use the word luxury, but had the benefit of not having the direct impact physically of the storm, enabling the infrastructure and leadership in the city to concentrate on dealing with its responsibilities for those who were hammered directly. And as a result of that, in the days immediately following the storm, most of what I was doing and other Baton Rouge legislators were doing, council members, surrounding mayors, and the mayor and his staff were working on the coping mechanisms that the community was going to have to deal with in welcoming the new people to our community. And it was something that's been done, I think, in a responsible fashion. It's obviously not something that's completely satisfactory because you've got huge traffic problems. You've had strains on the infrastructure. You've had, in early days particularly, rampant rumors about problems that were not
Actually
real.
Shut downtown down for a half a day.
But for the most part, the leadership remained calm and the citizenry remained calm. And the result was that Baton Rouge has been able to, as best possible, take this in stride, open its arms, as Baton Rouge is known to do, and act in a very responsible manner. That's not to say we don't have a lot of challenges ahead of us.
And I want to talk about that on the next segment. This is Legal Lines with Locke Meredith and Senator Jay Dardenne. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, pleased to have on the show State Senator Jay Dardenne. We're talking about the effects of these terrible hurricanes on our state. Jay, we were talking about the city and all the challenges that it faces. Let's talk about them. Number one, traffic's just unbelievable. What do you do?
I think there is going to be a slow trickling out of the city in terms of the population base, the population growth that we've experienced to
Which
the
is
base.
what? I've heard 150, 160,000, 140?
I don't know, but I would guess between 150 and 200 would be my guess. Many of whom are going to be leaving or probably have already left. It's a little bit slanted right now because we have the RETA evacuees. So now we have a whole new cadre of people that we're dealing with.
And all the emergency support people.
And the emergency support people that are here, thank goodness, and helping us. But it's obviously creating a strain on an already challenged traffic system in our community.
We weren't real good beforehand.
And it's created questions about security, which is stable now and which is in good shape, and with the presence of the National Guard and the cooperative efforts of the Sheriff's Department and the Police Department and the availability of the Guardsmen, security has been good. Obviously, traffic accidents have increased, and we hope that that doesn't continue, but the stress on the infrastructure is still going to be here, and we're going to have to deal with it, and we're going to have to
So what do we do?
accommodate it.
What do we do? I mean, I've heard reports where, the feds are going to come in and give us all these millions of dollars to improve the infrastructure. Even if that happens, and you address whether or not you think it is, that's going to take years.
It is going to take years. I think there'll be some of that. I don't think there's going to be the huge largesse that everybody's counting on to totally fix every problem that we've got. That's just not realistic, and that's not, frankly, the solution that ought to be there. We can't expect suddenly this huge windfall of money to deal with every problem that Louisiana faces or that any community faces, but we can expect an acceleration of monies to start dealing with the problems that we're going to have to face. And those, I think, in Baton Rouge primarily center around traffic and give us an opportunity to try and to realize some of the needs that we've had long-term on a quicker basis. Long-term for the state, for the New Orleans area in particular, and for South Louisiana, we have some opportunities, and we have some opportunities to recreate the Louisiana and the New Orleans that we all love and that we all want to see return, but to recreate it in a reinvented way. Disney has a term called Imagineering, where the combination of imagination and engineering, which is what Louisiana needs to be about right now. We need to seize this crisis and the opportunity that comes from it in order to try and change the face of Louisiana in a positive way and to redevelop and rebuild New Orleans in a way that is going to create opportunities and jobs and an opportunity for the citizens of New Orleans and the citizens of Louisiana to make that hub for this state and that unique city in all of America the kind of progressive city we've always wanted it to be when we compare it to the Birminghams and the Atlantas and the North Carolina Triangle that seem to have passed us by because of our inability to take advantage of things or do things correctly over the course of the past 50 to 100 years.
I'm hearing between $100 million, $100 billion, up to the request, I think, from our congressional legislative group, $250 billion may come our way. First of all, what do you think we're going to get? Do you have a clue?
No, I have no idea. Those are mind-boggling numbers, and I don't think there's any way to gauge it. America has never faced this kind of a situation, this kind of a challenge. We were torn apart by the Civil War, our own man-made aggression, if you will, that resulted in catastrophe for the nation. We were torn apart by the Depression and what it did to the whole nation. But we've never had a natural disaster of this magnitude covering this much geography and affecting what America is now realizing, the portal to the country for energy and for seafood and for waterborne traffic and so much of our economy. And
I had no clue how
that.
valuable it is.
Well, it's
very
vital.
significant.
It's vital, and America is realizing that. But we've never had to deal with this, and the answer is I don't know how much. I don't think anybody knows how much money we're going to get, but we know this. We better be absolutely certain that the leadership in this state is accountable and is responsible and is realistic and is organized in a manner to deal with this money wisely, because we all know the suspicion that is coming with whatever dollars that come our way.
It's unbelievable.
Nationally. And it's been exacerbated, and it's going to be exacerbated when you start talking about dysfunctional government and you start looking at some of the legislation that's been introduced that has all these projects in it that don't seem to be directly related to the rebuilding effort. We have to be extremely focused, and we have to make certain that we're spending the money in an organized way. We need a plan, we need a vision, we need a mission statement for Louisiana.
Like a
we need a mission statement for New Orleans. In fact, I gave a speech shortly after the storm in Washington at a meeting that had been scheduled long before the storm, and I talked about the need, and I have written a mission statement for New Orleans, a mission statement for Louisiana. Those are the kind of things you do in collaboration with lots of people, and that's what ought to happen. But the point is, it can be done, and we ought to say, this is the end result we want. Now, how are we going to use the resources to get there? Let's not do it backwards. Let's just not say, give us as much money as you can, and we'll figure out how to spend it. Let's start developing the plan. This is what we need to get there. This is the way we're going to go about doing it, and then let's do it. Let's prove that Louisiana can do it. But let's do it responsibly, and let's do it with accountability.
Jay, I'm really nervous that, and we were talking about it, that we're going to get bogged down in more bureaucratic red tape.
Well, I'm
in
worried
the administration of all of this stuff, and nothing's going to get done. We're going to be talking about this a year from now.
Well, something's going to get done, and we have to do this deliberately, and we have to do it carefully, but we also have to do it with dispatch. But I'm worried about bureaucracies at all levels, too. I mean, the legislature, for example, the Senate and the House have both created study committees made up of all different senators and representatives to study what went wrong and what ought to be done. Well, we have a bunch of existing committees that can do that. I don't want to have the Senate have a study and the House have a study and occupy all the people who need to be out there thinking and working, spending all their time testifying before committees. They could be doing that in Washington, too.
No kidding.
We don't need multiple layers of inquiry. Let's have a very focused inquiry. Let's find out what we did right, what we did wrong, and what we need to do going forward. But I worry about a overly bureaucratic response so that it can be bureaucratically critical of bureaucratic shortfalls. Let's not do that. Let's go about the business of trying to figure out what we're going to do in the future and how we're going to plan the future. And that's what I would like to see happen, and it's very slow in developing. In my view, I hope it's going to accelerate.
Is the leadership very inclusive right now? I mean, it seems to me this is such a huge problem for our state that it should no party lines should be involved here in this process. I mean, is anyone reaching out across the aisles in this scenario?
Well, not to my knowledge. Certainly not necessarily at the legislative level. I don't know that that's happening. Although I will say that the committees that have been formed have Republicans and Democrats and people from in the communities affected and outside the communities. And I hope we're going to be able to do that. And I don't think you're going to see a partisan divide in this state. I hope that's not going to be the case. We need to be focused on what we need to do together.
Jay, thank you so much for being on the show. Let's do this again in a few months and see where we are.
Very good.
This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines and Senator Jay Dardenne. Thank you for being with us.